In a historic congressional showdown, watch how Senator J.D. Vance dismantled Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez using just one sheet of paper and the unvarnished truth. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had not made a sound in 9 seconds. Her mouth had opened twice. Each time the muscle of the jaw had moved correctly, but each time no air had reached the larynx. The voice that had dominated cable news for 8 years, the voice that had launched 1,000 viral clips and won her 5 terms, that voice was no longer in the room. Across the witness table, a Marine from Middletown, Ohio, looked at her over the single sheet of paper in front of him. "Congresswoman, I'll wait. Hit that like button and subscribe, because in the next 43 minutes you are going to watch a Lance Corporal take America's most followed progressive apart using one sheet of paper, 3 Marine veterans nobody had introduced yet, and a House Ethics Committee report dated July 25, 2025. Let us go back 28 minutes to the moment AOC made the worst mistake any politician can make in a Senate veterans hearing. She insulted the Marine. You wrote a book about being poor. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was 3 minutes into her opening remarks. She wore a fitted scarlet blazer. Her hair was in a French braid that had taken her stylist 40 minutes that morning. The Met Gala engagement ring on her left finger caught the C-SPAN light from 12 feet away. The hearing was titled, "The Military Recruitment Crisis: Why Working-Class Americans Aren't Joining the Service." AOC had been invited as a House oversight guest. She had reviewed the witness list on the train up from New York the day before. There were no names on it that worried her. The senator from Ohio, sitting at the lower bench, had a single sheet of paper in front of him. No folder, no briefcase, no phone. He looked to her unprepared. She continued, "With respect to my colleague from Ohio, and I do mean respect because I respect anyone who served, I find it interesting that the person positioning himself as the voice of the American working class is also the person who got a Yale Law degree, joined Peter Thiel's venture capital firm in Santa Rita. Francisco made millions, and then bought a house in Cincinnati for $1.4 million while telling the rest of us how to think about poor people." The Democratic side of the dais smiled. A staffer in the second row gave a small thumbs up. "Senator, you are not from the working class. You are about the working class. There is a difference. The working class is people like me, born in the Bronx, daughter of working-class immigrants, worked as a bartender. The working class are the people I represent, not the people you write books about for Netflix." What AOC did not know was that the man at the lower bench had spent the previous evening in a small office in the Russell Senate Office Building, with one staff member, 3 printed pages from the House Ethics Committee Report 2 FEC, filings from 2019, and a single handwritten letter on yellow legal paper from an 83-year-old woman in Cleveland, Ohio. He had folded the letter 3 times and put it in his coat pocket. He had folded the rest of the documents into a single sheet of paper 8.5 by 11, written front and back in his own handwriting. The single sheet was now on the lower bench in front of him. AOC was not finished. And I would also note with respect that my colleague's military service, and I want to honor it, was as a public affairs writer. He was by his own admission a journalist in uniform. He spent 4 years writing press releases at Cherry Point, North Carolina, and a 6-month deployment to Iraq, during which, by his own account in his memoir, he saw no real combat. I think it is important, particularly in a hearing about military recruitment, that we be precise about what kind of military service we are discussing. She sat back. Her communications director in the wings nodded once. Across the aisle, Senator J.D. Vance, age 41, did not respond. He did not lift his glasses. He did not adjust the microphone. He did not move his hands. His eyes stayed on the single sheet of paper in front of him. The room was quiet enough that the C-SPAN audio engineer in the truck outside heard the air conditioning unit cycle on for the first time that morning. 14 seconds passed. Vance lifted the single sheet of paper 1 inch off the bench. He set it back down. He turned the microphone toward himself. "Congresswoman, thank you for the welcome." The voice was quiet, the kind a Marine sergeant uses when he is about to tell you something you do not want to hear. "I served alongside 17 Marines in Iraq, 2 of whom did not come home. I will not be discussing my own service today because there are 3 Marines in this room sitting 2 rows behind your Chief of Staff, whose service I would rather you discuss. I will get to them." He paused, just one beat. And I would just note before we begin, for the record, since you mentioned the Bronx, that I checked the Westchester County property records this morning. 48 Wakeman Road, Yorktown Heights, New York. Single-family home, 3 bedrooms, purchased in 1994 by Sergio Ocasio Roman and Blanca Ocasio for $245,000. Where you grew up from age 5. The median household income in Yorktown that year was $96,000, about 4 times what mine was growing up in Middletown, Ohio. The Democratic side of the dais was no longer smiling. So when you tell the people watching this hearing that you are from the Bronx the way I am from the working-class congresswoman, with respect, neither of those statements is quite accurate. Your father lived in the Bronx. You lived in Yorktown Heights. There is a difference. A small drawl. A smile that was not quite a smile. But the Bronx address isn't actually what I came to ask you about. I came to ask you about a different address. A Brooklyn address. The address of a black female designer named Aurora James. He lifted the single sheet of paper again, who didn't get paid for 6 months. Congresswoman, the House Ethics Committee voted on this 6 weeks ago. Bipartisan. Unanimous. Were you planning to address it today? The press section adjusted. 3 reporters who had been writing about AOC's opening statement turned the page in their notebooks. The MSNBC reporter in the front row, who had covered AOC for 6 years and had introduced her on cable as the future of the Democratic Party 11 separate times, wrote the date July 25, 2025, and underlined it. Vance read from the single sheet, July 25, 2025. United States House of Representatives Committee on Ethics. Bipartisan ruling. 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats, unanimous vote. Subject, and I am quoting the title of the committee report, quote, "In the matter of allegations relating to Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez." Page 17 of the report uses the phrase, and I am quoting your committee, Congresswoman, not mine, quote, "impermissibly accepted gifts," end quote. Are you familiar with the report? AOC's voice arrived with the kind of preparation she used on cable. Senator Vance, I have accepted the ruling and remitted the additional payments. The committee specifically found that my violations were not knowing and willful. Congresswoman Vance said quietly, the committee found you violated the House gift rule. I'm not interested in knowing and willful yet. I'm interested in what you got. Let me list it. She did not respond. He continued. 1. A free ticket to the Metropolitan Museum of Art Costume Institute Gala, September 13, 2021. Value, $30,000. Riley Roberts, your boyfriend at the time. Mr. Roberts is under House rules neither your spouse nor a dependent child. Therefore, he was not eligible for free admission. The committee ruled this an impermissible gift. $30,000. A beat. 2. A custom-made dress designed for you personally by Aurora James of Brother Vellies. The committee discovered in May of this year, by demanding the production records that your team had not previously turned over, that the actual cost of goods sold for that dress was $6,279.1. Applying standard retail markup of 3 times cost, the dress had a fair market value of approximately $18,000. The drawl found AOC's eyes for the first time. You paid Aurora James $300. The press section had stopped writing. 3 of them were watching AOC's hand. Her hand had drifted unconsciously to the engagement ring on her left finger. She was turning it. 3. The shoes. Initially, the plan was for you to keep them. The shoes were the subject of an internal communication, September 18, 2021, which the committee obtained. The email reads, quote, "The plan is for AOC to keep the shoes since she can't return them," end quote. The shoes were eventually returned. The committee found on a date later than represented to investigators. Some confusion remained. The committee called this, and again I am quoting your own ethics committee, quote, "some intention to purchase the shoes, or at least confusion between the parties around this issue," end quote. He set the page down on the lower bench. Now, Congresswoman, the part of this story that I think the 4 million Americans watching this hearing will find most interesting is the part about Aurora James. A pause long enough that the C-SPAN audio engineer turned the gain up 1 notch, then realized he didn't need to. Aurora James is a black female designer. She founded Brother Vellies. She launched the 15% pledge to direct 15% of corporate retail shelf space to Black-owned businesses, which is a cause I have personally praised. She is in every public way the kind of small business owner that you, Congresswoman, claim to fight for in every speech you give. In the wings, AOC's communications director had stopped texting. She was holding the phone screen down, the way people hold phones when they realize that whatever they were about to text is no longer the most urgent thing in the room. Aurora James, according to the committee's findings, was pressured by your staff to lower her prices. Quote, and I am reading directly from page 62 of the committee report. The designer may have lowered costs in response to statements from Representative Ocasio-Cortez's staff, and that payments to vendors were significantly delayed. End quote. He looked up. The vendors who provided the dress, the handbag, the hairpiece, the makeup, and the transportation, Black female designer included, were not paid for 6 months. Some payments did not occur until after the Office of Congressional Ethics had begun investigating you. 6 months, Congresswoman. The dress said, "Tax the rich" on the back, while the Black female designer waited for her $300. This was the moment Adam Schiff 6 months earlier had begun to do the math at minute 15 of his own hearing. This was the moment Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez began to do hers. She had run the math before on the train up from Penn Station the day before. She had run it again in the green room. The math was simple. The committee found her violations were not knowing and willful. The press story had peaked in late July. The additional payments had been made, and the matter by the committee's own language was closed. She had built her opening for this hearing around the assumption that the Met Gala question would not come up. She had not factored in that closed in a House Ethics Committee report did not mean closed in a Senate hearing room with 4 million live viewers. Senator, my staff handled those payments. The committee specifically found I was not aware of the delays. Congresswoman Vance said, immovable. You said publicly in 2023, quote, I just never, ever would have allowed that to happen knowing what I have learned. That's 3 nevers. You used 3 nevers about a payment delay to a Black female designer. A pause. Then in May of this year, May 5, 2025, your counsel sent a letter to the committee. The letter said, and I am quoting from page 141 of the report, the Congresswoman was not aware of these costs and did not authorize these costs, end quote. He set the single sheet down. Congresswoman, in 2023, you said you would never have allowed it. In 2025, you said you didn't know about it. Both statements cannot be true. One of them is a press release. The other one is testimony to a federal committee. The 4 million Americans watching this hearing are entitled to know which is which. The dress, Congresswoman. The dress said, tax the rich, on the back in red letters, 6 inches tall, while you stood at the top of the stairs of the Metropolitan Museum of Art at a gala that cost more per ticket than the average American makes in 6 months, while Aurora James waited 178 days for her $300, the drawl was almost gentle. The slogan was on you, Congresswoman. The bill was on her. The press section was silent. 2 reporters in the second row had stopped pretending to take notes. They were watching AOC's right hand, which had moved from the engagement ring to the water bottle, then back to the engagement ring in a small, unconscious loop. Hit that like button if you knew about Aurora James waiting 6 months for her $300, while AOC wore the dress on the cover of every magazine in America. Comment Aurora James if this is the first time you have heard a politician forced to confront the actual House ethics ruling on live television. Subscribe, because the next bombshell is about a phone call AOC made to a man named Cy Cat, and it has $885,000 on it. Vance turned the single sheet over. The other side was covered in handwriting. But the dress isn't actually the worst payment problem in your career, Congresswoman. The worst payment problem happened 4 years before the dress, and it is currently being looked at by the Federal Election Commission for regulatory exposure of up to 5 years per violation. Congresswoman Saikat Chakrabarti, your former chief of staff. Vance's eyes stayed on the single sheet. He did not look at AOC. Founding engineer at Stripe, multimillionaire, bought a $1.6 million home in 2018, took a salary as your chief of staff of exactly $80,000. A pause. 80,000. Not a penny more. Another pause. The drawl was conversational, the kind of voice a country lawyer uses when he is about to walk a witness off a cliff. Federal disclosure rules require congressional staffers earning more than $126,000 a year to file detailed forms outlining all of their outside income investments, gifts, and business interests. By keeping Mr. Chakrabarty's salary at $80,000 below that threshold, your office made sure that your chief of staff, a Silicon Valley multimillionaire who was running 2 political action committees and 2 limited liability companies on the side, never had to disclose the rest of his income to the federal government or to you or to the American people, AOC spoke. Senator Vance, my chief of staff's compensation was a matter of internal personnel. I'm not done, Congresswoman. I haven't gotten to the part where you could face incarceration. A beat. I mean to where you could allegedly face incarceration. The press section did not laugh. The young AOC staffer in the 3rd row did not laugh. The Atlantic reporter in the 2nd row wrote in his notebook, "I have never seen a senator make that joke that quietly." Mr. Chakrabarty established 2 political action committees, Brand, New Congress PAC, and Justice Democrats PAC. Both supported your election in 2018. You sat on the board of Justice Democrats from December 2017 through June 2018, and according to the Daily Caller News Foundation, working from corporate filings and archived copies of the Justice Democrats website, you and Mr. Chakrabarty during your primary campaign had majority control of Justice Democrats PAC. This control was not disclosed to the Federal Election Commission. Either disclosure was required or the FEC will have to find that it wasn't. The FEC has not closed the matter. He turned the single sheet 90 degrees. Now the 2 PACs, you and Mr. Chakrabarty controlled, they raised donations from the public. PACs are required by federal law to itemize every dollar in and every dollar out. Public record. That is what the Federal Election Campaign Act of 1971 requires. A beat. Sitting alongside the 2 PACs were 2 limited liability companies, Brand New Campaign LLC and Brand New Congress LLC, both controlled by the same Mr. Chakrabarty. LLCs do not have to itemize their spending. LLCs are for federal disclosure purposes a black box. The draw picked up its heat. Between 2017 and 2018, the 2 PACs systematically transferred $885,000 to the 2 LLCs labeled, and I am quoting, the FEC filings, quote, strategic consulting, end quote. Once the money landed in the LLCs, federal regulators cannot trace where it went. The donors who gave to the PACs cannot trace where their money went. The American public cannot trace it. He looked up. The only person who can trace where the $885,000 went, Congresswoman, is Mr. Chakrabarty, who controlled all 4 entities whom you put in charge of your office on a salary structured to keep him below disclosure thresholds. This was the moment AOC's right hand released the engagement ring. Her hand drifted to the water bottle. Her fingers closed around the cap. They did not turn it. The hand sat there frozen the way. A hand freezes when the brain is occupied with something more urgent than the task the hand was supposed to perform. The brain in this case was running the 2nd calculation of the morning. The first calculation on the train from Penn Station had been about the Met Gala. He has the report, it's public, we accepted the ruling, the story is closed. That math had collapsed in the previous chapter. This 2nd calculation was simpler. It was made up of 3 words, he has psychot. She had not heard the name spoken on a Senate microphone in 7 years. She had assumed the way politicians assume that the FEC inaction in the years since the complaint meant the matter had quietly died. The hand on the water bottle did not move. Vance was still reading. Bradley Smith, Republican former chairman of the Federal Election Commission, asked about this scheme by the Washington Examiner. I am quoting his exact words, "It's a really weird situation. I see almost no way that you can do that without it being at least a reporting violation, quite likely a violation of the contribution limits." A beat. Hans von Spakovsky, former FEC commissioner, asked the same question by the Daily Caller, quoting him, "If the facts as alleged are true, and a candidate had control over a PAC that was working to get that candidate elected, then that candidate is potentially in very big trouble, and may have engaged in multiple violations of federal campaign finance law, including receiving excessive contributions. He went on to specify, quote, up to 5 years holding per violation. The drawl found AOC's eyes. Per violation Congresswoman, plural. There are, by the National Legal and Policy Center's count, dozens of potential violations in the $885,000. The MSNBC reporter in the front row was no longer holding her face still. Her mouth had opened slightly. She was looking at the witness table the way a person looks at an accident they had been told for years was a parade. Now, 3 weeks after the FEC complaint was filed against you and Mr. Chakrabarty, January 20, 2019, you posted a tweet. He read it from the single sheet. Quote, money in politics is the why behind every issue. Why we don't have universal health care. Why we don't have a Green New Deal. Why we don't have justice. Big money in politics is a corrupt cancer, end quote. A pause. A corrupt cancer Congresswoman. 3 weeks after a federal watchdog filed a formal complaint, alleging that the man you put in charge of your office had engineered an $885,000 dark money laundering scheme. You called money in politics a corrupt cancer, a beat. While the cancer was allegedly in your chief of staff's office down the hall from your office, on a salary structured to keep him below disclosure thresholds. The drawl set the single sheet down. The first truly devastating moment of the morning was about to land. The drawl knew it. The 4 million viewers did not yet. Congresswoman, I want to be precise about something. The voice dropped 1 register. Still quiet, but with respect politeness, the Senator Vance is a careful man. Politeness went away. You have spent 8 years on cable news telling working-class Americans that big money in politics is what is destroying their country. You have raised millions of dollars on that message. You have built a political brand on that message. You have named the cancer a beat. And in the same 8 years between the $885 0 inches, your former Chief of Staff's LLCs, the $30,000 Met Gala ticket your boyfriend got for free, and the black female designer who waited 178 days, had $300. You have, in my judgment, become exactly the kind of politician you tell your followers to hate. A pause. Quieter still. You are not the cure to corrupt money in politics, Congresswoman. You are an example of it. The hearing room was silent. In the wings, AOC's communications director had stopped looking at her phone entirely. She was looking at the back of her boss's head with the expression of a woman who has just realized that the message discipline she had been hired to enforce had a structural flaw she had never been told about. Comment 5 years per violation if you have ever in your life seen a Marine quietly explain federal campaign finance law to America's most followed progressive on live television. Subscribe because the next bombshell is about a fence in Texas, an empty road, and a word so wrong that a historical memorial issued a public response within 24 hours. Vance turned the single sheet over to its original side. He did not open his coat yet. But the money, Congresswoman, isn't actually the worst part of your record. The money is the part where you are corrupt. The next part is the part where you are cruel. He read from the single sheet without preamble. June 17, 2019. You appeared on Instagram Live. You said, quote, the United States is running internment facilities on our southern border, and that is exactly what they are, end quote. A pause. Eyes on AOC. Internment facilities, Congresswoman. Those were the words you chose. AOC responded, Senator, I stand by that statement. The historical concept of an internment facility is broader than the extermination sites of the historical tragedy and the conditions at the southern border at the time, Congresswoman. I want you to listen to who responded. He read from the sheet. 24 hours later, June 18, 2019, the official Twitter account of the Auschwitz-Birkenau State Memorial Museum, which has the responsibility of preserving the memory of 1.1 million human beings wrongfully perished in those facilities, issued a public response. A beat. That was not the only response. Yad Vashem in Jerusalem said, your language, quote, trivializes the tragedy. The Anti-Defamation League, which is run by Jonathan Greenblatt, whose grandparents lost family members in those actual facilities, issued a statement that read, quote, those facilities are a horror. They were created with the intent to eliminate, end quote. The Survivors Foundation publicly condemned you. Ben the Ark, the progressive Jewish organization, your political ally, condemned you. The Republican Jewish coalition condemned you. He looked up, and you, Congresswoman, did not retract. You did not clarify. You did not apologize. You doubled down. You said you stood by the language. You suggested that the people criticizing you were ignorant of the term's history. The hand on the water bottle had not moved for 2 minutes. I want to read you something, Congresswoman. This was the moment Vance unfolded his coat pocket. He produced a single piece of yellow legal paper folded into thirds. The folds were sharp, like a letter that had been carried in a coat pocket for several days. This is a letter written to my office 2 weeks ago by a constituent of mine in Cleveland, Ohio. Her name is Ruth Goldfarb. She is 83 years old. He unfolded the letter. The handwriting was visible to the C-SPAN camera. The producer in the truck zoomed in on it slowly without saying anything into his headset. Mrs. Goldfarb wrote this letter by hand. She did not type it. She wanted, she said in her cover note, for it to look the way letters from her mother used to look. So I will read it the way she wrote it. The voice dropped lower than it had been all morning. Slow. The pace of a Marine sergeant reading the names of the fallen at a memorial service. My mother, Esther Lipschutz, was born in Warsaw, Poland in 1904. She had 7 brothers and sisters. She was the only one who survived. The other 7 perished at Treblinka. Between July and November of 1942, the press section was no longer writing. The senators on the dais had stopped fidgeting. 2 members of the audience, the elderly couple sitting in the back row who had been there since 9/15, were holding hands. My mother survived because on August 15, 1939, my grandparents put her on a kindertransport to England. She was 4 years old. She did not see her mother again. She never knew until after the war what had happened to her mother or to her brothers and sisters. She was told they had gone to a work camp. A small pause. Vance turned the page over. My mother lived to be 96. She passed away in 2019. In the last year of her life, she lived in a nursing home in Shaker Heights, Ohio. She no longer spoke. The dementia had taken most of her words, but she could still hear. And on the day in June 2019, when the congresswoman from New York compared a fence in Texas to an internment facility, my mother heard it. The home had the news on. I was visiting that day. I watched my mother turn her face to the wall. A breath. She did not turn back, Senator Vance. For 3 weeks, she refused food. She refused water. She passed away on July 9, 2019. The congresswoman did not end my mother's life, but the congresswoman, in my opinion as a daughter, took the last 3 weeks. And I would like to know, Senator Vance, if you ever have the chance to ask her on television whether she has, in the 6 years since, ever once thought about what those words did to the 4-year-old girls who were put on the kinder transport, or whether the engagement metrics were worth it. A final breath. With respect, Ruth Goldfarb, Cleveland, Ohio. May 2026. Vance folded the letter. He did not put it back in his pocket. He set it down on the single sheet of paper lined up squarely. The hearing room was silent. Not the silence of an audience holding its breath. The silence of an audience that had forgotten it had breath to hold. Congresswoman, I'm not going to ask you whether you remember Mrs. Goldfarb's mother. You don't. The drawl was no longer a drawl. It was no longer quiet. It was the voice of a Marine on a hilltop. I'm going to ask you something else. He found her eyes. Do you know how Mrs. Goldfarb's mother's 7 brothers and sisters perished? He did not pause for an answer. They were rounded up in Warsaw in the summer of 1942. They were loaded into cattle cars. The journey to Treblinka took 3 days. There was no food, there was no water, there was a single bucket. The cars were sealed. When the doors opened at Treblinka, the people who could still walk were told to leave their luggage. They were told they were going to a shower, a beat. The building had no shower. It had carbon monoxide. 8,000,000 people perished in that building. Congresswoman, between July 1942 and November 1943, most of them in the same way, most of them on the same day they arrived. His hands had not moved from the bench. That, congresswoman, is what an internment facility is. It is not a fence. It is not a tent. It is not a border patrol facility you stood 12 feet from for a photograph. It is an industrial tragedy operation in which children were separated from their parents at the entrance, and the parents were gone within 4 hours. A pause. That is what Mrs. Goldfarb's grandmother walked into. That is what the Memorial Museum preserves the memory of. That is what Yad Vashem documents. His eyes did not leave hers. And until you say the words on this microphone, in this chamber, at this hearing, until you say, I was wrong, and I should not have used those words, and I apologize to Mrs. Goldfarb's mother who heard me on a television in a nursing home in Shaker Heights, every survivor in this country and every grandchild of one knows exactly what kind of politician you are. They have known for 7 years. They have been waiting for someone to say it out loud. A beat. Today, Congresswoman, I'm saying it out loud. The hearing room was silent. In the front row, a woman in her 60s with gray hair and a small navy handbag was crying without making a sound. She was not the C-SPAN camera, later confirmed Mrs. Goldfarb. She was a woman from Brooklyn whose great-grandmother had perished at Sobibor in 1943. Her name was never published. AOC's left hand, which had been on the water bottle, drifted upward. It did not reach her face. It stopped at the level of her chin, fingers splayed slightly, the way a hand stops when the brain forgets what it had asked the hand to do. She did not speak. Comment, Mrs. Goldfarb, if you just heard the most devastating 8 words ever spoken to a sitting congresswoman on live television, I'm saying it out loud. Subscribe, because the next chapter brings 3 Marine veterans onto the stage, and one of them is a Bronze Star widower, and he brought a photograph. Vance picked up the single sheet of paper. He did not put the letter back in his coat pocket. He left it on the bench, folded, lined up squarely. But Mrs. Goldfarb, Congresswoman, isn't the only person whose family you used. There are 3 more in this room. He read the date. January 27, 2021. A beat. 21 days after the United States Capitol was attacked. 21 days after Officer Brian Sicknick was hit with a chemical irritant and a fire extinguisher and passed away the next day. 21 days after 140 Capitol police officers were injured. Some beaten with flagpoles, some had fingers broken, some lost teeth. They held the line for you and for the other members of the United States Congress. The drawl was steady. You have in the 5 years since given dozens of speeches about that day. You have said you thought you were going to lose your life. You have said the Capitol Police saved your life. You have used the word insurrection in approximately 1500 fundraising emails. I had a staffer count them. Between January 7, 2021 and today, by the most conservative estimate of those filings, you have raised more than $30 million off January 6th. He set the single sheet down. $30 million, Congresswoman, on the work of the Capitol Police on January 6th. AOC interjected Senator Vance. My fundraising and my legislative votes are separate matters. I haven't asked you a question yet. A pause. On January 27, 2021, 21 days after the attack, the Senate voted on a $1.9 billion supplemental funding bill for Capitol Police, to pay for medical care for the injured officers, to pay for additional staffing, to pay for the security upgrades that would prevent another attack. The ayes found AOC. You voted no, Congresswoman. A beat. 21 days after they took chemical spray for you, you voted no on their funding. Another beat. The same week you sent a fundraising email, I have it here, that began, quote, I thought I was going to lose my life that day. The Capitol Police saved my life, end quote. The email raised, according to your own FEC, filing $2.3 million in 1 week. A pause long enough that the C-SPAN robotic camera, which had been programmed to track speakers, drifted briefly off Vance and back to AOC. You raised $2.3 million on the Capitol Police, while voting against $1.9 billion for the Capitol Police. The same week, Congresswoman. The room shifted. The Atlantic reporter in the second row wrote 3 words in his notebook. The words were the same week. This was the moment AOC stood up. She pushed her chair back 2 inches. She set both hands on the desk in front of her. The cable news instinct woke up. The 8 years of viral clips woke up. The squad press conferences woke up. Her voice rose with the kind of moral conviction that had, for those 8 years, played extremely well on Instagram Live. Senator Vance, I voted against that bill because the Capitol Police, like every police department in this country, needs reform, not more militarization. The bill contained funding for offensive equipment, that would have further militarized the Capitol grounds. I voted no in solidarity with the broader movement for police reform that began in 2020 after the tragedy of George Floyd. As for the fundraising, the donations to my campaign committee are how grassroots Americans fight back against the kind of politics that produced the January 6th attack. The progressive press section started clapping. And let me be clear, Senator, about the working class, about the Marines you claim to defend. They are not props. They are not your campaign material. They are working-class Americans who joined the military because we have hollowed out their towns with the same defense budgets you keep voting for. They are veterans who cannot get an appointment at the VA because we underfund veteran care while writing blank checks to defense contractors. The Marines you claim to represent, Senator, are victims of capitalism, of the same defense contractors who fund your campaign. And the Capitol Police, frankly, are also victims of a system that asks them to risk their lives for a Congress that does not represent them. I am not voting against the Capitol Police. I am voting against a Congress that uses them. 2 senators on the dais nodded. The MSNBC reporter mouthed in real time. That's the soundbite. 15 full seconds the hearing room belonged to AOC. Across the witness table, Vance did not interrupt. He did not gesture. He did not move. The single sheet of paper sat squared in front of him. The gold-farbed letter was still on top. When the applause faded, he spoke. The voice was not louder. It was not quieter. It was exactly the same. Congresswoman, you said one thing in that statement that I want to repeat back to you. You called the Marines victims of capitalism. Those were your exact words. He looked at the chairman of the panel. There are 3 of them sitting 2 rows behind your chief of staff right now. A beat. Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I'd like to invite 3 observers to address the committee. The chairman granted it. In the 3rd row on the audience left aisle, 3 men and 1 woman stood up. The cameras found them. The first was a Hispanic woman in her late 20s. She wore a navy blazer over a Marine Corps Veterans Association t-shirt. She walked to the witness microphone with a slight limp, the kind a person walks with when one leg has metal in it. My name is Maria Castillo. I am 28 years old, Lance Corporal, United States Marine Corps. I was born in the Bronx, actual Bronx, Cypress Avenue. My parents are undocumented. They came here from the Dominican Republic. I enlisted because Boston University did not offer me a scholarship, and Yorktown High School wasn't where I went. A pause. She did not look at AOC. I served 2 combat tours in Helmand Province, Afghanistan. I was wounded by a combat hazard on April 3, 2020. I have a metal plate in my left tibia. I was awarded the Purple Heart. I voted for Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez in 2018 because I believed she would represent the Bronx. Another pause. In 2022, Congresswoman, you voted against the National Defense Authorization Act that contained the 4.6% pay raise. My base pay at the time was $31,500. The raise would have added about $1,450 to my annual income. With 3 children in the Bronx in a year, inflation was 9%. I lost my apartment in 2023. Congresswoman, I now live with my mother in the Bronx. The actual Bronx. The one you left when you were 5 years old. She sat down. The second man was Asian American, mid-30s. He walked to the microphone with the posture of a man who had carried things for a living. My name is David Park. Sergeant, United States Marine Corps, retired. I am Korean American. My parents own a dry cleaner in Flushing, Queens. I joined the Marine Corps in 2009. 4 deployments, 3 combat. I now live 2 miles from the southern border of your district, Congresswoman. I drive an Uber on weekends because my Marine pension does not cover 3 children in New York. A pause. In June of 2019, Congresswoman, when you compared the southern border facilities to internment facilities, my grandmother, who had spent 2 years in a North Korean labor camp before her family escaped to the South in 1952, turned off the television. She has not turned it back on. She cannot. She is 86 years old. You broke something in her, Congresswoman. I am not certain you understand what. He sat down. The third man stood. He was older than the other 2, late 30s. He carried a small leather wallet. He did not speak immediately. He opened the wallet. He removed a photograph. He set it on the witness table without looking at it. The photograph faced the cameras. The cameras zoomed in. The photograph showed a young woman in Marine Corps dress blues. She was holding a baby. My name is Joaquin Reyes. People call me Jack. I am Puerto Rican. I was born in Boston. My mother is from San Juan. My father is from Ponce. The voice was steady. My wife was Lance Corporal Esperanza Reyes. She was Puerto Rican too. She served in Afghanistan. She was awarded the Bronze Star. She came home in 2016. The VA scheduled her first PTSD appointment for 14 months later. She tragically lost her battle with mental trauma on August 6, 2019. She was 29 years old. We had a 6-month-old daughter at the time. Silence. In June of 2019, 6 weeks before my wife passed away, you stood in front of a fence in Texas, Congresswoman, and you cried for the cameras. The same month, you compared a Border Patrol facility to a historical horror. The same year, my wife was sitting in a folding chair at the Bronx VA waiting room holding our daughter, waiting for an appointment that would not come for another 14 months. A pause. The American press covered the tornado, crying photograph for 3 weeks. The American press did not cover my wife. My wife served 2 combat deployments. You served 0. Yet she is the one who needed help, and you are the one who got the cameras. Reyes did not look at AOC. He looked at the photograph. Congresswoman, I do not hate you. I want you to understand that I am too tired to hate anyone. But I would like you to look at this photograph. His finger touched the corner of the photograph. He slid it forward on the witness table 6 inches. AOC's eyes went to it, then away, then to it again. They did not stay. That is Esperanza, 2 months before she passed, holding our daughter who is now 7 years old, and who has asked me every single year on her mother's birthday, why Mommy went to Afghanistan to keep us safe, and then nobody kept her. Safe. A beat. I do not have an answer for her. I think, Congresswoman, with respect, that you do not have one either. But the next time you go to a fence in Texas, please, please, please consider whether the cameras are looking at the right woman. He picked up the photograph. He placed it back in the leather wallet. He folded the wallet shut. He walked back to his seat. This was the moment Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tried to speak. Her mouth opened. The communications director in the wings stood up. AOC's mouth opened a second time. A small sound emerged. The sound was not a word. It was something between a breath and a syllable. It died at the lips. The C-SPAN audio engineer in the truck outside instinctively reached for the gain knob and saw that the gain was already at maximum. The microphone was working. The voice was not. She tried a third time. Nothing. In the front row, 61-year-old Blanca Ocasio, who had flown up from Florida the night before because her daughter had asked her to slowly close her eyes. She did not open them again until the hearing was over. 9 seconds passed. When Vance spoke, the quiet voice was lower than it had been all morning. Congresswoman, I want the 4 million Americans watching this hearing to understand exactly what has happened in this room over the past 43 minutes. A pause. You called Lance Corporal Castillo Sergeant Park and Sergeant Reyes victims of capitalism. Lance Corporal Castillo has metal in her leg from a combat hazard in Helmand Province. Sergeant Park's grandmother survived a North Korean labor camp and will not turn the television back on. Sergeant Reyes's wife served 2 combat deployments and tragically lost her battle with mental trauma 14 months after coming home, holding the daughter she would never see grow up. A beat. They are not victims of capitalism, Congresswoman. They are the working class, the actual one, the one whose names you do not know. The voice was very quiet now. You wore a $30,000 dress that a black female designer waited 178 days to be paid $300 for. You ran an $885,000 dark money scheme through your chief of staff while tweeting that money in politics is a corrupt cancer. You compared a fence in Texas to an internment facility while a 4-year-old kinder transport survivor turned her face to the wall in a nursing home in Shaker Heights. You voted against the funding for the Capitol Police 21 days after they took chemical spray for you, and you raised $2.3 million off their work the same week. A long pause. You did not betray the working-class Congresswoman. You replaced them with yourself live on television for 8 straight years. And the 4 million Americans watching this hearing and the 3 Marines sitting 10 feet from you are entitled today to the difference. The hearing room was silent. AOC's hand had drifted sometime in the previous 90 seconds to the engagement ring on her left finger. It was no longer turning it. It was holding it. Vance did not pick up another sheet of paper. He folded the single sheet in half. He placed it on top of the gold-farb letter. He folded his hands. Congresswoman, one question. One word. Yes or no. The hearing room did not move. In June of 2019, when you stood 12 feet from a fence in Texas and used the worst word in human history to describe an immigration facility, were you in that moment more concerned with the children behind that fence or with the photograph being taken of you? A pause. Yes or no, the first second passed. AOC opened her mouth. The second, the third. A small breath, no word. The fourth second. AOC looked at her communications director in the wings. The communications director was no longer looking at her phone. The communications director was looking at AOC. Her expression was the expression of a woman who had been hired 4 years earlier to manage a politician's image and had just realized in real time that the image was something the politician no longer owned. Fifth second. Sixth. AOC looked at the witness chairs. Sergeant Reyes was looking at the witness table. Lance Corporal Castillo was looking at AOC. Castillo did not blink. Seventh second. Eighth. AOC's eyes drifted to the front row. Blanca Ocasio still had her eyes closed. Ninth second. 10th. AOC's left hand released the engagement ring. It drifted toward her water bottle. It stopped halfway. It returned to the table. 11th second. She said, "The framing of this question is fundamentally yes or no, Congresswoman. I'll wait." 12th second. AOC said nothing. 13th second. 14th. Vance nodded once. He did not stand. He did not raise his voice. He did not gather papers. There was only the one sheet, and it was already folded and stacked on the gold-farb letter. "Mr. Chairman, I yield the remainder of my time to Lance Corporal Castillo, Sergeant Park, and Sergeant Reyes. They have been waiting for an answer to this question for a lot longer than 14 seconds. The chairman gave a 30-minute recess. She did not gather her papers quickly. She stacked them once. She set them down. She stacked them again. Her communications director in the wings was attempting to make eye contact. AOC did not make eye contact. Blanca Ocasio in the front row was crying without making a sound. Sergeant Reyes was looking at the leather wallet on the witness table, the one with the photograph inside. He did not turn either. AOC walked past Vance. She did not stop at the door. She turned. The cameras turned with her. Vance was still seated. The single sheet of paper folded was on top of the gold-farb letter, both squared on the bench. He was looking at the witness table. He was not looking at her. "Congresswoman," she paused at the door. "My door is open any time you bring Mrs. Goldfarb's letter. We'll read it together." She did not respond. She walked out. The door closed behind her with the kind of sound that a heavy door makes when nobody on either side wants to slam it, but nobody wants to soften it either. The aftermath came fast. It came in 3 waves. By 1138 a.m. Eastern, 3 hashtags occupied the top 3 trending positions on every American platform. Hashtag Mrs. Goldfarb at number 1. Hashtag Aurora James at number 2. Hashtag Ill Wait at number 3. Sergeant Reyes's clip the moment he set the photograph on the witness table passed 41 million views before sundown. The Memorial Museum reposted its 2019 invitation to AOC at 1:14 a.m. The Anti-Defamation League issued a statement that did not name AOC. It did not need to. Aurora James was asked for comment, but the New York Times gave a single sentence. The invoice was sent on October 4, 2021. The payment cleared on March 9, 2022. The math is in your hands. AOC's communications director released a statement at 1:14 p.m. 12 sentences. Used right wing 4 times manufactured, 3 times distort twice. Did not mention Yorktown Heights. Did not mention Aurora James. Did not mention Mrs. Goldfarb. Did not mention Lance Corporal, Castillo Sergeant Park, or Sergeant Reyes by name. The Marine Corps Association, which represents 100,000 Marines and Marine families, formally requested a public apology by sundown. The Yorktown Heights town historian, asked for comment by the Washington Post, confirmed her childhood address. A retired federal prosecutor on CNN that afternoon said the line that would be played and replayed for the next 48 hours. In any other context, the brand new Congress LLC scheme would already be a federal indictment. The only thing protecting the Congresswoman is the United States Senate. J.D. Vance declined every interview request. There were by sundown 912 of them. He flew Reagan National to Cincinnati Northern Kentucky International. He landed at 6:14 p.m. Eastern. He drove the Honda Civic. He still owned the one he had bought for $1, 500 inches, 2007 when he came home from Iraq. North on I-75 to Middletown, Ohio. He pulled up to a small white house on McKinley Street. His sister, Lindsay, age 46, was on the porch with a cup of coffee. Mama had passed away in 2005. The house was Lindsay's now. Long flight, J.D. Long flight, Lindsay. She handed him the coffee. The television in the kitchen was on. It had been on all day. You called Mama a hillbilly on national TV. Mama called herself a hillbilly, Lindsay. Yeah, she did. A long pause. Lindsay rocked in the porch chair. That woman, the one from Yorktown, she ever served, J.D. No, she didn't. That tells you something, don't it? Yes, ma'am. Lindsay sipped her coffee. Inside the kitchen, the television cut to footage of Sergeant Reyes setting the photograph on the witness table. Lindsay closed her eyes. That Marine wife, the Puerto Rican one. She was 29. Yes, ma'am. Same age as me when I had Hannah. Yes, ma'am. Lindsay opened her eyes. You done good today, J.D. Moma'd be proud. The Marine from Middletown, Ohio drank his coffee and watched the streetlights come on along McKinley Street. The kid from Middletown had reminded America of something the Marine Corps had taught him at age 19 in a chow hall outside Fallujah, that working class isn't a slogan, that service isn't a sentence in a memoir, and that the Bronx like Iraq is a place you have to actually go. If you made it this far, you just heard the morning, a lance corporal from Middletown, Ohio, a Marine who served in Iraq, came home with $1,600 and put himself through Yale Law School on the GI Bill. Taught America's most followed progressive what working class actually looks like. He used one sheet of paper. He used a letter from an 83-year-old woman in Cleveland whose mother passed away at Treblinka. He used 3 Marine veterans, 1 Bronze Star widower, and 1 photograph of a young woman in dress blues holding a baby. Smash that like button if you believe a Marine still beats a marketing campaign. Subscribe to this channel, because there is more where this came from. Comment, I'll wait if you think those 2 words just became the most devastating phrase in American political television. Share this with the working class American in your life, the actual one, not the imaginary one in a campaign ad. God bless our Marines. God bless Lance Corporal Castillo, Sergeant Park, Sergeant Reyes, and the daughter who still asks why nobody kept her mother safe. God bless Mrs. Goldfarb in Cleveland, and her mother who heard the words on the television in a nursing home in Shaker Heights and turned her face to the wall. And God bless the kid from Middletown who still believes the working class is not a brand, it is a place you actually grew up in. Ask Yorktown Heights, they know the difference.